How did the cavalry, who was supposed to be combat effective at all times, manage to keep their powder dry after they've been riding all over the countryside and crossing numerous streams and rivers, and a lot of times having to swim their horses? Even our keyboard warriors over on our other horse swimming video made some comments as far as how are you going to be combat effective after you've swam across the river and literally everything you have is soaked through? Well, thanks to the primary records found on the Research Arsenal database, a description from the 1st Maine Cavalry stated the following during the countless times that they had to swim various rivers.
Fording the swollen river was anything but pleasant or safe, even by daylight, the horses being obliged to swim, and that with a strong current finning. However, all of the regiment got safely across. There were rumors of casualties in other regiments, though some of them had much difficulty about it, and all got thoroughly wet. The water running over the tops of the saddles and flooding the saddlebags and such of the haversacks as were strapped to the saddles. Ammunition, except the Burnside carbine cartridges, which had metallic cases, stood no chance at all that morning.
But how did soldiers keep their powder dry? Thankfully, the book Lessons of a Decade actually discusses this very thing. In one section, they talk about how any general worth his salt should be able to get a body of troops across a river without any difficulty. Except the problem that everyone's having is getting your ammunition wet and therefore absolutely useless. However, one of the solutions that was presented was bringing a wagon with you. Technically, any of these wagons that the military used should be watertight enough that all they have to do when they get to a body of water that they need to cross is remove the wagon bed from the axle and float it across. Now that you have your homemade pontoon boat, a volunteer is going to swim across the river armed only with a saber with his horse. He's going to go to the far side with a rope. A flying bridge is instantly formed with an empty wagon in which 5 or 6 men are going to cross, armed and leading their horses, pulled by the first man who had crossed. So it's going to have a rope attached to that wagon box as it's being pulled across. A second line should be sent across in the boat by which this group is going to be arriving. So now you are going to have 2 ropes attached to the far shore, essentially. As the initial volunteer is pulling the rope that is towing this wagon bed filled with men and supplies and so forth, there is a second line attached to the back of it. He pulls it across. The men that were in this first wagon bed immediately get out, they disperse, they immediately start fighting the enemy, and that second line is secured. Then what's going to happen is the second wagon bed that's on the shore that you just came from is going to come across with more men. The now empty wagon bed that you just unloaded and the men are now fighting is going to go back across. And in this manner, you can get all of these men and troops and supplies across that body of water. In this way, enough men can be supplied, covered by artillery and sharpshooters to ford any body of water. By means of a little practice, an entire cavalry corps should be able to cross any river within an hour.
The mounted troops crossed near Mill Springs. The men were ferried over while the horses were unsaddled, driven into the river, and made to swim. One horse led the way, his rider swimming behind, holding his tail to guide him, and the other horses followed. I was mounted on a horse of splendid bottom, and on which I had swum the Cumberland River on several occasions. I saw a little in advance, and in 10 feet after entering the stream, we struck swimming water. My horse swam some distance and struck what I afterwards found out from some citizens to be a big boulder, and my horse scrambled upon it and secured foothold. Almost immediately after entering the water, my comrade's horse commenced plunging and struggling, and the men in pathetic tones began calling for help. After my horse got somewhat steady on the boulder, I began calling to the men who were in distress in order to give them the best directions I could, but their voices had become hushed, and to my repeated calls I received no answer. I inferred they were all drowned. I could hear their horses swimming off down below, and I heard some of them leave the water, and their footsteps sounded plainly on the gravel beds at the edge of the river. After making preparations, cutting my forage sack loose, and disposing of some other articles to light my horse, I spurred him off the rock, and he took me safe to the opposite bank.
Let's go back and look at our first question. Can you keep your powder dry when you're swimming your horse across a body of water? Not quite in the way that you're thinking. Most likely, you won't be able to. You're using paper or linen cartridges for the most part, and everything that you own is going to be submerged to some point in that water. In order to really keep your powder dry, you had to be inventive, like these troopers did. Whether you're using a wagon bed, a canoe, or you have a system of some sort where someone is going to get wet, but the rest of the men will not, you'll find a way to make it work. Thank you very much for watching, and until we see you in the field next time, keep your powder dry and ride hard.